No one expected a group of small, scattered colonies to defeat the most powerful empire on Earth. The British Empire ruled the seas, controlled global trade, and had one of the strongest armies in history. So how did 13 colonies with no navy, no unified government, and almost no resources manage to break free? Why did Britain fail to crush a rebellion it expected to end in months? And how did a conflict that started over taxes turn into a revolutionary movement that reshaped global politics? In this video, we are going to discuss all these things, so let's start. The American Revolution didn't begin with a call for independence. It began with frustration. After the 7 Years' War, Britain was drowning in debt, and the government decided the American colonies should help pay for the empire's costs. New taxes like the Stamp Act and the Townshend Act angered colonists, who believed they were being taxed without having any political representation in London. For Britain, it was a reasonable demand. For colonists, it felt like a violation of their rights. What started as an economic disagreement slowly became a political and philosophical conflict. Tension grew as British soldiers were stationed in American cities to enforce order, and each new law made the colonists more united. Protests and boycotts spread. Groups like the Sons of Liberty mobilized ordinary people. Incidents like the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party showed that the colonies were no longer just complaining, they were resisting. Britain responded with harsh punishments, known as the Intolerable Acts, hoping fear would restore order. Instead, it pushed the colonies closer together. For the first time, representatives from all colonies met in the First Continental Congress. Unity was forming where none had existed before, when British troops marched to confiscate weapons in Lexington and Concord. In April 1775, the spark finally ignited. Local militia confronted the British forces, shots were fired, and suddenly the conflict became a war. At this point, the colonies had enthusiasm, but almost no military structure. Britain, on the other hand, had trained soldiers, experienced generals, and global support. Logically, the rebellion should have collapsed, but the situation was far more complex. One of the key advantages the colonists had was leadership. George Washington, appointed commander of the Continental Army, understood his limitations. He didn't try to defeat Britain in open, traditional battles. Instead, he focused on survival. His strategy was simple but brilliant: avoid destruction, stretch the war, exhaust the British, and wait for political or international shifts. Washington knew he didn't have to win big victories, he just needed to keep the army alive long enough for Britain to make mistakes. And Britain did make mistakes. The empire underestimated the colonists' determination and misjudged the geography of the conflict. Fighting a war across the Atlantic was expensive, slow, and logistically impossible to control. Communication took weeks, reinforcements took months. Supplies were unreliable. The British strategy depended on capturing major cities like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, assuming that would end the rebellion. But the colonies didn't depend on a capital. Their strength was spread through farms, forests, and small towns. Britain could take cities, but it couldn't kill the revolutionary spirit. The war changed dramatically when the colonies declared independence in 1776. The Declaration of Independence wasn't just a political statement, it forced the conflict into a war of national survival. Now, surrender was not an option, and more importantly, it opened the door to international alliances. France, Britain's historical rival, saw an opportunity. After the American victory at Saratoga in 1777, France openly joined the war, providing money, weapons, officers, and most importantly, a navy. Spain and the Netherlands also indirectly supported the colonists. The revolution was no longer a local rebellion, it had become part of a global struggle against Britain. International support slowly changed the balance of power. The British military was stretched across multiple continents, fighting not only the Americans, but also protecting colonial possessions around the world. The war became too expensive and too widespread. Meanwhile, the Continental Army grew more organized. Baron von Steuben trained the soldiers at Valley Forge, transforming them into a disciplined fighting force. Washington still avoided unnecessary battles, But now he had a stronger army to use when opportunities came. The turning point came in the South, where Britain hoped to rally loyalists and break American resistance. But the plan collapsed as guerrilla fighters, militias, and continental soldiers created constant unrest. The British Army, now tired and isolated, moved to Yorktown in 1781, expecting naval support. Instead, the French Navy blocked the British fleet, trapping the army on land. Washington and French General Rochambeau surrounded Yorktown from the other side. After a long siege, the British commander, Lord Cornwallis, surrendered. It wasn't the end of the war, but it destroyed the political will in London. After Yorktown, the British public and Parliament no longer believed the war could be won. The costs were too high, and the empire was facing crises elsewhere. Negotiations began, leading to the Treaty of Paris in 1783, where Britain recognized the independence of the United States. A small rebellion had defeated a global empire not by overpowering it, but by outlasting it, outmaneuvering it, and turning its weaknesses into opportunities. The American Revolution was not just a military victory, it was a transformation of ideas. It introduced a new political model based on popular sovereignty, representation, and the belief that government must serve the people. These ideas spread across Europe, Latin America, and the entire world, influencing revolutions, constitutions, and political movements for centuries. It also reshaped global power. Britain eventually rebuilt its empire, but it would never again treat its colonies the same way. The world had learned that empires could be challenged and defeated by determined societies driven by ideals. Looking back, the American Revolution succeeded because it was more than a war. It was a struggle of identity, motivation, geography, leadership, international alliances, and political vision. The colonies didn't win because they were stronger. They won because they were united by a cause that made them willing to sacrifice everything. While Britain was fighting a distant conflict with no clear end, the fall of an empire and the rise of a new nation remind us that power is not permanent. It shifts with ideas, decisions, and the willingness of people to fight for change. And that is how a group of colonies reshaped the world.